In the kingdom of Umuoha, there lived a princess named Obianuju, who was renowned for her extraordinary beauty. She had smooth, fair skin, full lips, large brown eyes, framed by long lashes, and a perfectly sculpted figure with generous curves. Her beauty was so legendary that young men would stumble and walk into walls and pillars when she passed by, distracted by her allure. Obianuju was the daughter of Eze Umuoha, the ruler of the kingdom. As the Eze's only child, she was set to inherit his throne and become the first queen of Umuoha. By tradition, she was expected to marry a prince from a neighboring kingdom to form an alliance. Eze Umuoha arranged for her to be betrothed to Izuchukwu, the prince of Amaimo, a powerful kingdom to the north. While Izuchukwu was handsome and charming, Obianuju felt no spark between them. Her heart belonged to Chibueze, the blacksmith's apprentice. Though he came from a poor family, Chibueze was kind, hard-working, and thoughtful. He brought Obianuju flowers that he picked himself and recited poetry that he had written just for her. They would sneak away together whenever they could to spend time gazing at the stars and sharing their hopes and dreams. Obianuju knew in her heart that she wanted to marry Chibueze, not Izuchukwu. The day before Obianuju was to leave Umuoha to marry Izuchukwu, she went to her father and pleaded with him to call off the engagement. My heart belongs to another, the blacksmith's apprentice, Chibueze, she declared. I know he comes from a poor family, but we love each other deeply. Please, father, do not make me enter a loveless marriage. Eze Umuoha was shocked and outraged. You would throw away this alliance with a Maimo for a commoner? He thundered. I will not allow it. You are my only heir, and you will do your duty to this kingdom. You will marry Izuchukwu. Obianuju begged and argued for hours, but the Eze would not budge. Heartbroken, she retreated to her chambers, where she wept bitterly at the prospect of being separated forever from her dear Chibueze. She had to find a way to stop this wedding. But how? That night, Obianuju hatched a plan. She gathered some basic supplies and sneaked out of the palace under the cover of darkness. Locating Chibueze's modest hut on the edge of the kingdom, she knocked urgently on the door. When a bleary-eyed Chibueze opened the door, Obianuju declared, I am running away and I want you to come with me. We can build a new life together far from here. Chibueze was hesitant, knowing the palace guards would be sent to find the missing princess. But his love for Obianuju compelled him to take this risk. The pair saddled two horses and rode off, aiming to reach the distant Mmanwu Mountains by dawn. As the sun rose over the Mmanwu Mountains, Obianuju and Chibueze paused to rest and water their horses in a small stream. They were both exhilarated by their daring escape and by the prospect of a future together. We should be safe here for a while, Chibueze said as he helped Obianuju dismount from her horse. These mountains are remote and treacherous. We can make a simple life for ourselves here, away from your father's wrath. Obianuju nodded, her eyes bright. As long as we are together, I will be happy in even the humblest of huts, she declared. The pair found an abandoned hunter's cabin in a secluded valley where they could take shelter. It was small and drafty, but they didn't mind. They spent the day gathering firewood, wild berries, and mushrooms for a rustic supper. Afterwards, they sat outside under the stars, dreaming aloud about the future and even sketching plans for the cozy cottage they would build together. For a few weeks, Obianuju and Chibueze managed to carve out an idyllic existence in their hidden valley. Their days were spent fishing, foraging, and working to construct a more permanent home. At night, they would wind down beside a crackling fire, Chibueze often serenading Obianuju with songs as she rested her head on his shoulder. But one morning, as Obianuju drew water from the stream, she heard a twig snap in the forest behind her. Whirling around, she saw palace guards approaching, the royal crest blazoned on their uniforms. Her heart dropped. They had been found. Obianuju stood frozen as the guards strode towards her. Princess, you must come with us at once. Your father, the Eze, is gravely ill and wishes you to return to Umuoha, their captain said, grasping her arm firmly. Obianuju wrenched her arm away. No, tell my father I am never returning, she cried desperately. Just then Chibueze came rushing through the trees, alerted by Obianuju's shouts. His eyes widened at the sight of the palace guards. Run, Chibueze! Obianuju yelled. But before Chibueze could flee, two guards tackled him and restrained his arms. The captain clucked his tongue. Come now, princess. Don't make this any harder than it needs to be. You must do your duty and return home. This dalliance with the commoner ends today. Hot tears sprang to Obianuju's eyes as she realized she had no choice now but to comply. She nodded silently, shoulders slumping in defeat. Chibueze called out as the guards dragged him in the opposite direction. I will find you again, Obianuju. Our love cannot be denied. Climbing reluctantly onto one of the guards' horses, Obianuju took one last look at her beloved as he disappeared into the forest. She fervently hoped they would be reunited again some day. The journey back to Umuoha was long and miserable for Obianuju. Her heart ached for Chibueze, and she dreaded facing her father again after defying him. When she arrived at the palace, Eze Umuoha was there to greet her, looking stern but relieved. Father, have you really been ill? Obianuju asked hesitantly. The Eze shook his head. No, but I had to invent some story to lure you back home. I knew you would not let your dear old father suffer alone. Obianuju flushed with anger at being manipulated, but held her tongue. Over the next few days, Eze Umuoha tightened his security around Obianuju, confining her to the palace and guarding her bedchamber door at night. This is for your own protection, he insisted when she protested. Please, father, be reasonable. I want to choose my own husband, not have you dictate my future, Obianuju implored. But the Eze refused to discuss it. The wedding date with Prince Izuchukwu was fast approaching, and the Eze pressed his daughter to resume wedding preparations. But Obianuju dragged her feet, still quietly nursing hope that she might reconcile with Chibueze instead. Then late one night, as Obianuju sat brushing her long hair, she heard a faint tapping at her window. Peering outside, she saw a hooded figure perched in the tangerine tree. Her heart soared. Could it be Chibueze? Obianuju unlatched the window and leaned out to get a better look at the mysterious hooded figure. Chibueze, is that you? She whispered, hopefully. The figure looked up, and Obianuju saw that it was not Chibueze, but one of her father's guards, Okechukwu. Forgive me for startling you, princess, Okechukwu said. I've come with an urgent message from Chibueze. Obianuju's pulse quickened. Chibueze, you've seen him. He is all right? Yes, princess. He evaded capture after you were taken. He wants you to meet him at midnight in 2 nights' time by the old radiant flame tree on the eastern edge of the kingdom, Okechukwu explained. He has a plan to help you both escape Umuoha forever. Joy and nervousness bubbled up in Obianuju's chest. Tell him I will meet him there. She pressed a small pouch of coins into Okechukwu's hand in thanks. The guard nodded and vanished silently into the night. Over the next 2 days, Obianuju pretended all was normal, not wanting to arouse her father's suspicions again. But internally she vibrated with anticipation, counting down the hours until she could reunite with Chibueze under the radiant flame tree's glowing branches. Finally, the appointed night arrived. Obianuju waited until the palace was still, then slipped out of her chamber wearing a dark hooded cloak. She crept through shadowy corridors and gardens until she reached the eastern gate. Taking a deep breath, she pulled up her hood and stepped out into the moonlit kingdom. Obianuju's pulse pounded as she hurried through the quiet streets of Umuoha. She stuck to the shadows, worried a patrol might spot her distinctive figure. At last, she reached the outskirts of the kingdom, and the ancient radiant flame tree came into view. Its bioluminescent purple leaves cast an eerie glow across the meadow. Obianuju hesitated, not seeing anyone. Had Chibueze forgotten? Just then a twig snapped behind her. Whirling around, Obianugu found herself face to face with Prince Izuchukwu. Several armed guards stood menacingly behind him. Izuchukwu, what are you doing here? Obianuju gasped. The prince gave her a cold smile. Did you really think I wouldn't notice my bride-to-be sneaking away in the dead of night? You are not as clever as you believe, princess. Obianuju stepped back, glancing around for any sign of Chibueze. Looking for your blacksmith. Izuchukwu sneered. I intercepted him on the road and he is currently my prisoner. If you want to see your precious Chibueze again, you will marry me tomorrow as planned. Tears of frustration sprang to Obianuju's eyes. Izuchukwu had outmaneuvered them somehow. Please release him. I will do anything, she begged. Izuchukwu shook his head. The wedding proceeds. Once you are officially my wife, I will let him go. Maybe. Obianuju had no choice but to acquiesce. Heart sinking, she allowed Izuchukwu to escort her back to the palace, all hope of reconciling with Chibueze seeming lost. The next day, the entire kingdom buzzed with preparations for Obianuju and Izuchukwu's wedding. Obianuju went through the motions like a sombre ghost, each smile feeling painted on. As her handmaidens laced Obianuju into an exquisite beaded wedding gown, she asked them to grant her a few moments alone. Once she was certain she was not being observed, Obianuju retrieved a small vial hidden under her mattress, a concentrated sleeping draught she had requested from the palace doctor. Obianuju raised the vial to her lips, hesitation flickering across her face. A deep sleep would delay this wedding, but only temporarily. She needed to find where Izuchukwu was holding Chibueze. Strengthening her resolve, Obianuju drank the potion down. Within minutes, she collapsed gracefully onto a chaise lounge, vial slipping from her limp hand. Her frightened handmaidens rushed back in, but could not rouse the princess. The wedding was postponed as confusion rippled through the palace. Obianuju was carried to her chambers and the doctor called. After examining her, he declared she seemed healthy overall but needed rest. Guards were stationed outside her door for safety. Under cover of night, a shadowy figure slipped past the dozing guards and through Obianuju's window. Okichukwu the guard. He gently shook the princess's shoulder. Nuju's eyes fluttered open. The sleeping draught was wearing off. Come, princess, Okichukwu urged. We must find Chibueze. Obianuju and Okichukwu crept through the darkened palace corridors, heading for the dungeons. Okichukwu had secured a ring of keys to unlock the cells. As they descended the cold stone steps, they could hear a guard snoring from his post outside the dungeon entrance. Okochukwu put a finger to his lips, signaling Obianuju to stay quiet. Moving stealthily, he grabbed the guard from behind and rendered him unconscious. Working swiftly, Okchukwu tried several keys in the lock until one clicked open the heavy dungeon door. Obianuju rushed inside, peering into the gloomy, cavernous room, lit only by a few guttering torches. Chibueze! She cried out. Where are you? Her voice echoed, but there was no answer except dripping water. They searched every cell, but all were empty. Chibueze was not there. Distraught, Obianuju turned to Okechukwu. Where could Izuchukwu be keeping him? Okechukwu considered this. There are some old storage rooms and tunnels beneath the palace, not used much now. We could search there. Gathering their courage, they headed into the labyrinth of abandoned rooms and corridors. Just as they were about to give up hope, Obianuju heard a faint moan from behind a crumbling brick wall. Chibueze! She rushed to the wall and called out, My love, we are here. Obianuju, came the weak reply. You came for me. They tore at the loose bricks, finally creating a hole large enough to see Chibueze huddled inside a tiny cell chained to the wall. Working together, Obianuju and Okechukwu managed to wrench the metal door open. Obianuju flung herself into Chibueze's arms, weeping with relief. But their reunion was short lived. Guards stormed into the chamber, alerted by the noise. Obianuju, Chibueze, and Okechukwu found themselves surrounded and trapped. Rough hands grabbed Obianuju, pulling her away from Chibueze. They were dragged back upstairs to face a livid Prince Izuchukwu. You treacherous snake! Izuchukwu hissed at Obianuju. If you wanted to ruin this wedding, you should have just refused me directly instead of all these foolish intrigues. Obianuju stood tall. I tried to refuse you, but you and my father would not listen. You cannot force me to marry against my will. The prince's face darkened dangerously. But just then, heavy footsteps rang out as Umuoha stormed into the hall. What is the meaning of this? The Eze thundered. Izuchukwu pointed accusingly at Obianuju and Chibueze. Your defiant daughter conspired to rescue this worthless commoner instead of marrying me as you commanded. The Eze's piercing gaze settled on Obianuju. Is this true? Have you betrayed Prince Izuchukwu and your kingdom? Obianuju lifted her chin. Father, I have not betrayed Umuoha, only followed my heart. Chibueze may not be royal, but he is kind, wise, and true. I love him with all that I am. Please try to understand. The Eze stared at Obianuju, his expression unreadable. The tense hall waited for his verdict. Finally, the Eze turned to Izuchukwu. It seems my daughter does not wish to marry you after all. This wedding cannot proceed. Izuchukwu sputtered in outrage, but the Eze silenced him with a look. Sometimes we must accept what fate has written, even if it defies tradition, the Eze pronounced. You have my blessing, daughter. Obianuju wept with joy and rushed into her father's arms. Maybe love could conquer station and custom after all. Obianuju and Chibueze got married in an elaborate wedding. During the wedding, the guests ate, drank, and laughed in happiness. The couple lived forever, happy after.